Okay, so let's dive in. Imagine your mind, your psyche, as this big old house, maybe Victorian one, a bit rambling, full of different rooms and memories.
A familiar idea. Corridors of experience.
Exactly. But somewhere in there, maybe down a less visited hallway, there's this one door. And it's always been locked.
The forbidden room.
Yeah. And we're not just talking about, physical intimacy here. It's the whole tangled web, desire, fear, the meanings we attach to our sexuality, often starting way back.
Right. And the key thing, I think, is that this locked room, even locked, casts us a long shadow, doesn't it? It shapes things.
Absolutely. It influences how we relate to people, our ambitions, maybe even anxieties we don't understand.
And just keeping it locked takes energy. That act of avoidance, that itself becomes part of who we are.
So the big questions are, why is it locked? What are we trying to keep contained? Or maybe keep ourselves away from?
And what happens if we actually, find the key? Or just try the handle?
Freud had a lot to say about this, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
He saw sexuality as this foundational force, not just one aspect of us, but a current running through everything.
And crucially, he argued it starts really, really early, not just an adolescent thing.
Right. Think about a little kid, a toddler maybe, just discovering their hands, their toes, pure curiosity.
Innocent exploration.
But then maybe a parent reacts, a bit startled, maybe embarrassed, maybe even a sharp, don't do that.
And that moment, that small interaction, it can be the first signal, right? The first hint that some parts of our bodily experience are okay, and others are maybe not.
The beginning of the inner sensor, the negotiation.
Exactly. These tiny moments, a girl told off for rubbing her thighs, a boy learning maybe not to touch himself for comfort, they aren't just forgotten. They build up.
They become the bricks in the wall around that room, the first layers of repression.
And the critical point, the one Freud really hammered home, is that repression doesn't eliminate the desire. It just transforms it.
It pushes it somewhere else, like trying to hold the beach ball underwater.
Precisely. It pops up unexpectedly. Maybe as anxiety, maybe as physical symptoms with no clear cause, like Anna O's case, her body expressing what her mind couldn't face, unacknowledged feelings, frustrations.
So sexuality in this view is much broader than just, the act itself.
Oh, absolutely. It encompasses intimacy, pleasure, power dynamics, identity. It's woven into so much.
That concept of libido, not just sex drive, but a fundamental life energy seeking expression.
Yes, and when that energy hits roadblocks, trauma, cultural taboos, shame has to find another outlet.
So maybe intense ambition or a desperate need for control, or even chronic dissatisfaction could be that energy diverted.
It's a strong possibility. The psyche is incredibly resourceful in finding detours, which of course leads us to how we protect ourselves from facing this stuff directly.
The defenses, because it can feel threatening, right?
Definitely. So we might intellectualize, talk about sexuality in abstract terms, like it's about someone else entirely.
Or rationalize, everyone feels this way, or my relationship issues are just because we're incompatible, making excuses.
Right. And projection is a big one, seeing our own uncomfortable desires or traits in other people instead of ourselves.
It's like our mind's security system working overtime to keep us away from that locked door.
But all that guarding, all that energy spent on defense, it doesn't just contain the issue, it actively shapes our lives.
How so?
Well, think about the patterns. The person who consistently sabotages intimate relationships, maybe there's an unconscious link to early experiences with closeness. Something tied up in that forbidden room.
Or someone who pours everything into work, maybe avoiding vulnerability. Could that be partly a way to sublimate desires they find shameful or scary?
Exactly. Our careers, our hobbies, even our spiritual searching can be influenced by these hidden currents. The artist exploring themes of control, the activist fighting for freedom, but perhaps fearing personal intimacy.
It makes sense. There's a real fear there, isn't there? Not just fear of what might be inside the room, the unacceptable parts of ourselves.
The impulses, the memories we've buried.
But maybe also a fear of integration. Like if I open that door and acknowledge what's there, what does that mean for who I think I am? Could it change everything?
That's often the deeper fear. The fear of fundamental change, of losing the self we know.
Which means exploring this stuff takes real courage.
Yes. Courage to tolerate ambiguity, because it's rarely simple. Courage to sit with discomfort, to embrace the contradictions. Sexuality is messy.
It lives in that zone between raw instinct and cultural rules, between personal desire and what society deems okay.
It's a constant negotiation.
So, going back to the metaphor, if you were to approach that door, really get close, what would it feel like?
You might imagine Well, the creak of the floorboards nearby,
Yeah.
maybe a faint scent lingering in the air.
What kind of scent?
Could be anything, really. Musky,
Hmm.
maybe sweet, maybe even something acrid, tied to memory.
Like echoes, a mother's closeness, adolescent excitement, maybe the sting of shame from long ago first love.
Exactly. Those sensory details, they're part of the story too. They carry the emotional weight.
So it really presents a choice for anyone listening, doesn't it? Yeah. Stay in the familiar parts of the house, the well-lit rooms.
Where it feels safe, predictable.
Or take a breath, maybe feel that cool metal handle and just see what's on the other side. Knowing, as Freud might say, that some version of this room exists inside us anyway.
The question is readiness.
Yeah.
Are you ready to look? Because inside that room, there's this complex dance happening constantly.
The dance between what?
Between desire and defense. The psyche has this intricate security system, always on alert for what it perceives as a threat to our equilibrium, especially around sexuality.
Like an internal alarm system.
Precisely. Take Harkey's insomnia, a classic psychoanalytic example. His inability to sleep wasn't just random. It was seen as his ego resisting, preventing access to unconscious desires related to his identity that felt too dangerous to confront consciously.
So the symptom, the insomnia, was actually the defense in action.
In a way, yes. It was keeping something at bay. And remember that libido, that life force, when society puts up roadblocks, says this is taboo, it doesn't just stop, it transforms.
Like how?
Well, think about intense curiosity that gets shut down early on. Maybe it resurfaces later as a need to control situations or people. Or male vulnerability, often discouraged, might get channeled into aggressive competitiveness. That's sublimation, finding a socially acceptable or at least different outlet.
And there are other defense mechanisms too, right? Besides just repression.
Oh, many. Repression is the big one pushing things down. But then you get the return of the repressed, where it leaks out anyway, maybe in dreams, slips of the tongue, or symptoms.
Okay. And projection, we mentioned seeing yourself in others.
Yes, which can massively influence who we're drawn to or repelled by. Sometimes the very qualities we dislike in others are reflections of things we deny in ourselves.
What about reaction formation?
That's behaving in the opposite way to how you truly feel. Someone loudly condemning certain behaviors might, unconsciously, be battling those very same desires. Or someone championing radical freedom might actually be deeply afraid of genuine intimacy.
It's like an overcompensation.
Exactly. And so much of this is rooted in childhood. Think of little Hans, the boy with the horse phobia. Freud interpreted that fear as a symbolic way of dealing with his Oedipal conflicts, his fear and desire related to his parents.
So the horse wasn't really the issue.
The horse became the symbol, the container for the real, more threatening feelings. Our parents' attitudes towards their own bodies, towards affection, towards pleasure, that stuff gets absorbed and shapes our own defenses later on.
And those psychosexual stages Freud talked about, fixations.
Right. Getting stuck, in a sense, at a particular stage due to unresolved conflicts. Someone fixated at the anal stage might struggle with control and submission issues in relationships. Phallic stage fixation could lead to intense competitiveness or a constant need for validation. These early patterns echo in adult life.
Which brings us back to symptoms. You mentioned insomnia, but what about something like, say, involuntary celibacy?
From a psychoanalytic view, that could have many unconscious roots. Maybe a deep fear of rejection stemming from early experiences, or an unconscious identification with a parent who was distant or unavailable, perhaps even an ingrained belief that pleasure itself is wrong or dangerous.
So the surface behavior isn't the whole story,
Rarely. And this is where therapy comes in, particularly transference.
where the patient starts relating to the therapist like someone from their past.
Exactly. They unconsciously recreate those early relationship dynamics with the therapist. It feels incredibly real, but it offers a powerful window into their current patterns, especially around intimacy and authority, which are often tied to sexuality.
And these individual struggles, they don't happen in a vacuum, do they? Culture plays a role.
Hugely. A society that's very rigid and condemning about sex will create different kinds of conflicts and defenses than a more permissive one. But the fundamental tension between our inner desires and the expectations or prohibitions of the world around us, that's pretty universal.
So for someone listening, how can they start to notice these forces in their own life?
Pay attention to patterns. Who are you consistently attracted to? What kinds of people push your buttons? What relationship dynamics keep repeating? These aren't random. They're often manifestations of these deeper unconscious negotiations.
And dreams. You mentioned dreams.
Dreams are fascinating. They speak in symbols. Being chased might represent aspects of yourself you're trying to avoid. Locked boxes could signify guarded parts of your psyche, They offer clues to the underlying tensions.
Even just everyday language, the words we use or avoid around sex.
Absolutely. Euphemisms, charged words, jokes, they all reflect our ongoing psychological dance with this topic.
Now, if someone starts trying to explore this, to peek behind that door, what happens? Does it get easier?
Often it gets harder first. Resistance intensifies. The mind doubles down on its defenses,
How might that show up?
suddenly feeling bored with the topic, dismissing it intellectually. This doesn't apply to me. Maybe feeling unexplained anger or anxiety, or even physical discomfort. The body remembers. But these reactions, that resistance, that's not a roadblock. It's actually the path. It shows you where the sensitive points are.
So the resistance itself is informative.
Incredibly informative.
Yeah.
It points towards the underlying conflict. And then there's the superego, that internalized voice of parental and societal authority.
The inner critic.
Sort of. It dictates what desires feel acceptable and which feel forbidden. An overly harsh superego can lead to crippling guilt and shame, making intimacy impossible. A weak one might lead to impulsive behaviors that sabotage relationships in other ways. Either extreme creates problems.
It sounds like denying or distorting our sexuality has huge costs.
It does. Because ultimately, it's integral to who we are. Freud used the term eros, not just sex, but the life drive, the force that creates, affirms life. Cutting ourselves off from our sexuality in its broadest sense means cutting off a vital source of energy and meaning.
So the therapeutic process, the analysis, is about slowly untangling this.
Yes, patiently and compassionately. It involves gradually uncovering these truths, looking at how defenses were formed, revisiting memories, exploring the transference relationship, developing new ways of coping, not just repeating old patterns.
Let me give an example.
Think of someone like Emma, who experienced panic attacks whenever she felt attracted to her therapist. Through analysis, this was linked back to unresolved Oedipal feelings, forbidden desires towards her father, now transferred onto the therapist. Understanding that link didn't magically fix it, but it transformed the symptom. The panic became understandable, something she could work through, rather than just be overwhelmed by.
So the specific ways these patterns show up are unique to each person.
Absolutely. But the underlying dynamic, managing the tension between desire and prohibition, between eros and defense, that's a constant theme.
So for listeners, the invitation is really to notice. Notice your own resistance as you hear this. What memories surface? What feels relevant? What feels challenging?
Exactly. Pay attention to those inner responses. Because as the exploration deepens, as you metaphorically step further into that room,
Does it get darker or clearer?
maybe both, you might find unexpected things. A photograph falls off a dusty table, triggering a forgotten feeling. A floorboard creaks underfoot, reminding you of a hidden structure. You get closer to understanding the complex architecture of your own sexual being.
And what's the goal? What do you find at the center of the room?
Perhaps not a definitive answer, but a shift in perspective. Maybe you encounter what feels like a familiar stranger in the mirror of the unconscious parts of yourself you've denied, finally acknowledged. Insight often comes symbolically.
Through dreams again, or sudden realizations?
Yes. A dream, maybe, of being in an empty theater, realizing it represents a prohibition against expressing or enjoying your own show, your own sexuality. That realization can bring a huge emotional release.
The return of the repressed, but this time maybe met with understanding.
Hopefully. Becomes an embodied experience. You might understand how your workaholism was fueled by a fear of forbidden desires, or how a parent's overprotectiveness masked their own unresolved conflicts. The inner landscape rearranges.
Does that bring freedom?
It brings awareness, which is the foundation of freedom, but it also brings responsibility. Once you see the pattern, the destructive relationship choice, the self-sabotage, you have a conscious choice. Continue it or try to build healthier ways of being.
It sounds like peeling an onion or opening nested boxes.
It often feels that way. Gradual, sometimes painful, uncovering deeper and deeper layers of meaning. Dreams are crucial here. Falling might symbolize loss of control, being chased by denied aspects, locked doors pointing to guarded psychic areas.
And again, resistance is key, even saying I'm fine or this psychoanalytic stuff is nonsense.
Especially that. That dismissal can be a treasure trove of unconscious material. Why the need to push it away so strongly?
So the prompt for listeners is reflect on your patterns, your choices in love and intimacy. What parts of your sexuality do you embrace? What parts remain in shadow?
Yes, ask the questions. Tolerate not having immediate answers. That uncertainty is fertile ground.
What about sublimation? You mentioned it earlier, channeling that energy into work or art. Is that just another defense?
It's more complex. It's a negotiation between desire and reality. The artist, the teacher, the therapist, their work can be deeply infused with that libidinal energy, transformed into creativity, care, insight. It's not necessarily an escape, but an expression, acknowledging sexuality's fundamental role.
So complete resolution isn't really the goal. You don't solve your sexuality.
No, I don't think so. The goal is perhaps to live more consciously with the paradoxes, to integrate the light and the shadow, to find ways to honor desire within realistic and ethical boundaries. Sexuality is lived, not solved.
So, back to house one last time. That locked door. It was locked for a reason, perhaps. Protection until you were ready.
Possibly. And maybe behind it aren't monsters, but mirrors. Reflecting your deepest self, the parts you couldn't face before.
And that scent you mentioned earlier, maybe it carries not just pain, but potential healing, too.
Exactly. The memory of past wounds, but also the paths available now. The atmosphere in the room might feel heavier, yes, but also more alive, charged with possibility once you enter. The creaking floorboards aren't threats, but signs of exploration. The shadows invite inquiry.
Freud talked about analysis creating a more receptive surface, right? Holding the conflict and creative tension.
Yes. That's the gift of this kind of deep dive, I think. Not freedom from desire or conflict, but freedom within it. A deeper, more complex relationship with yourself.
So as we finish, the room itself might fade, but something lingers.
The essence of it. Maybe in your breath, your posture, a new awareness of old patterns. These become the guides for the ongoing exploration.
Because the journey doesn't end here.
Never. There are always more rooms, more layers, more truths to uncover. It all depends on the courage to keep turning the key.